Are you familiar with Waiting for Superman? If you're not, it's a documentary that follows promising kids who have career goals at such a young age, but they're stuck in a system of education that basically is pulling them back instead of encouraging them for their academic growth. And according to this documentary, 1 in 57 doctors lose their license to practice medicine, 1 in 97 lawyers lose their license to practice law, but only 1 out of 1,000 teachers are fired for performance-related reasons. Why is this? Tenure. Tenure is a status granted after a trial period for teachers. After the trial period, they are basically protected from being fired or from being dismissed. I believe that it's important to make sure that teachers are performing at their best and that they're making a full effort in the academic growth of the student. That is why my main claim is that teachers with tenure are having a negative effect on students' education. To support my claim, I'll be talking about number 1, students are not motivated to do well in class because the teacher is not driven. Number 2, education funds fail to be spent wisely on teachers with tenure. And lastly, teachers with tenure abuse the system, knowing that they can't be fired. Going back to number 1, that students are not motivated to do well in class because the teacher is not driven, we've all had at least once in our academic career that class that becomes sort of a break from our hectic classes, and where the teacher either gives you busy work or actually doesn't do anything at all. I know that I've had that, but we end up not learning what was supposed to be taught in the classroom, and that subject comes to haunt us back in our academic career later. According to teachersunionsexposed.com, between 2005 and 2008, only 28.5% of 11th graders in Chicago met or exceeded expectations in their state standardized tests. So by not learning the subject, once it does come back to haunt them when it comes to testing, and they actually won't graduate because of this. And also, charter schools are created to improve students' test scores, and that's another way to basically have students learn what they were supposed to. Charter schools help them because they focus only on the students' grades and scores, and if they do, those charter schools are kept open. Jarvis Lundy, a teacher at a charter school in New Orleans, observes that accountability is always on the minds of charter school teachers. For those who don't know what accountability is, when it comes to education, it's a policy of holding schools and teachers accountable for students' academic progress by linking such progress with funding for salaries, maintenance, etc. By teachers knowing this, they want to focus on students' education, not only on themselves, and not slack off. My second supporting claim is that education funds fail to be spent wisely on teachers with tenure. According to the Albany Times Union, the average process for firing a teacher in New York State lasts at least 502 days and costs more than $216,000. And because of this, because since tenure is required by law, it does take a long time for a teacher with tenure to be fired because they need a really, really good reason, and even then, sometimes they can escape from that. And according to Scott Reeder from a small newspaper group, over a 5-year period, school districts that retained attorneys and attempted to fire a tenured teacher spent on average $219,000 per case in legal fees alone. Instead of this money going to more useful educational purposes, such as more materials for students or anything that will help them, this money is being spent to fire an individual that has had a misconduct or performs poorly, but sometimes, again, they can't get out of it, usually. And my last supporting claim is that teachers with tenure abuse the system, knowing that they can't be fired. And an example of this is the New York Daily News reports that only 88 out of 80,000 teachers were fired from 2007 to 2010 for poor performance in only New York City. So in just New York City, out of 80,000 teachers, only 88 were fired because of misconduct or of poor performance. and that's because they don't want to spend the money, justify them because they can't afford it. And from 2006 to 2011, only 32 teachers were fired out of 132,000 in total outside of New York City. And this is according to teachersunionexposed.com. So only outside New York, in the rest of New York, not just New York City, only 32 teachers were fired. So not all teachers with tenure lack the ability or the passion to teach students and help them academically grow, but it is imperative for school districts to have thorough evaluations on teachers to separate those who do teach well and those who are lacking the performance to teach, and also observe those that lack the ability to teach and are having a negative effect on students. If this attitude is continued with tenured teachers, students will continue to not be motivated to do well in class, education funds will continue to be spent relentlessly, and the teachers will continue to abuse the system.
I thought the reference to the movie was a pretty good attention device, and you have a very clear statement of the proposition. There's an excellent layout of the secondary points, and in the body of the speech you do a good job signposting them and making transitions between those points. So organizationally everything is solid. On the evidence, I think that you start early on. You've got some good statistical information that you use in the introduction. I think you could use a little bit more statistical information. You do have examples like the New York City cases and the reference to Chicago. It would be nice if we could generalize this a little more. Especially, for instance, when you're talking about, you make comparisons in that introduction to people who lose their jobs in other contexts, professional relationships, for instance, doctors and lawyers and that sort of thing. There needs to be a little bit of explanation about why that higher standard seems to be more reasonable. Maybe the teachers are, I don't think the teachers are automatically better, but for instance, what they're being asked to do may not be subject to the same kind of rigorous evaluation, and there's an issue there that I think could be explored. I know you've got a limited amount of time, but it's kind of a complex topic. I thought you did a good job presenting information. Sometimes the source citations go by a little bit quickly, and I was not always clear who these organizations were that you're citing, but I did think, like I said, that you had good examples, a couple of statistics here and there to make those points. I thought the presentation was pretty solid. You look up on a pretty regular basis. I do think sometimes your voice drops out a little and you need to speak out a little bit more, but I thought it was, for the most part, pretty effective. Thank you.